Chapter 4 of Betty Baird by Hamlin Weikel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Holly Jensen. Chapter 4. At Last the Day. The eagerly awaited 10th of September, the day on which Betty was to start for the Pines, saw her up bright and early. Her trunk had been packed the night before by her mother, who hid many tears in tenderly prolonging the smoothing of the wrinkleless dresses in its depths. Into her brand-new satchel Betty put her toilet articles and some delicious chocolate candies which Edith had made for her, thinking with a thrill that she would save them for her new schoolmates, for are not boarding-school girls always half-starved? At the last moment, Miss Jane brought the promised bead chain, and a dazzling affair it was. It created some painful doubts in Mrs. Baird's mind, but Betty was as happy over it as if it were made of turquoise and diamonds. Miss Jane's delight in the child's pride over her new possession somewhat assuaged the loneliness she was feeling over her pet's departure. The bead chain, Betty decided, was not to be worn on the journey. She would save it for some special occasion like a reception, and wouldn't the girls open their eyes? There was not one in Weston as beautiful and stylish, and she doubted if even the Pines could produce its equal. Miss Jane was doubly pleased, for she believed in saving things, not in using one's best for everyday purposes. Not to have Sunday clothes was a sign of shiftlessness. The lump in Betty's throat grew larger as train time drew near. "You mustn't go to the station, Mother," she said, "for I couldn't get into the cars and leave you. If you are here, I'll make believe I'm only going to see Father off, as I did when he went to the General Assembly." To hide her own feelings, her mother kept up a steady conversation. "Miss Jane made a characteristic remark last night," she said, as they all tried to eat their breakfast. "Oh, what was it?" asked Betty, glad the silence was not broken by her sobs, as she had expected it would be in another minute. "When she was leaving," resumed Mrs. Baird, "she lingered in the hall, the light bringing out all the kind little wrinkles, and revealing the sympathy of her dear old heart, as she said to me, 'Don't you worry, though of course it's awful hard to have Elizabeth go away. I know all about these parting sceneries.'" "Very good, very good," Dr. Baird murmured, while Betty laughed until the tears came, tears that were close to the surface. Scarcely had they finished breakfast when Edith, Sarah, May, Jane, Martha, and Ada came to walk to the station with her. They were sadly self-conscious, for they stood in great awe of the minister, and Betty had suddenly grown to be a personage. Her mother took her aside for the last few minutes, and when she left the room, Betty said, "I'll remember. I'll never forget," sobs breaking through the brave words. "You make believe too, Mother. Oh, I'll have to make believe so hard." She hurried down the steps, and the little procession went down the street. Edith, as the best friend, had the post of honor next to Betty, the other girls walking sedately ahead. Miss Jane stood at her door for a last glance, waving a half-finished wash-rag, and Betty threw kisses until they turned a corner. Elder Huggentugler, whom she loved next to Miss Jane, trotted across the street to say good-bye, and to tell her to be a good girl and get all the book larnin' to be had, the while pressing into her hand his favorite gift, a poke o' peanuts. Each girl had a last message, a last fervent request for a letter with minute details about everything at the Pines. Even out of the car window Betty had to scream promises. "Yes, I'll write soon. I won't forget to tell you about all the girls. Write at once, Edith, and tell me about Mother, and go in to see her every day. Be sure to have your pictures taken in a group." The cars gave a jerk, another, and Betty was on her way to boarding school. While her father read the morning's news, she leaned back with her eyes closed, dreaming of the Pines. The teachers did not greatly engage her imagination. It was those fascinating schoolgirls of whom she had read. She would be friends with them at once, those dear, wonderful girls. The very first evening they would come to her room and talk and talk. Perhaps there would be a midnight feast, and they would invite her. She would show them her books and her bead chain. If one of them wanted to borrow the chain, she would not be mean and refuse. Maybe she would show them the lilac dress. That is, if they had nice ones of their own, for she would not flaunt her pretty dress before any girl with poor clothes. But might it not be more thrilling to conceal it until some reception and make a surprise out of it? Betty loved surprises and decided to keep the wonderful new silk a secret. Dr. Baird's amazement on seeing the great vine-covered stone building, a fine example of Georgian architecture with characteristic Ionic columns and massive arched doorways, surrounded by a park with magnificent trees from which it took its name, was scarcely short of stupefaction. Betty had all the assurance of a girl who had learned by heart 4 years at Lakeside, Patty at Hillsdale, Good Times at Irvington, and Rose Reeves of Belhaven School. She rejoiced that her surroundings were even superior to those of the golden-haired Lily Bent, who attended the most exclusive school in Chicago. She must write to Edith and tell her. She grieved to think that their ideal had been so low. She and her father did not talk much as they waited. She was looking about her eagerly, while her father, not sustained by an acquaintance with her books, was in a state of astonishment. "Don't you think this must be like the Queen of England's parlor, Father?" asked Betty, and she drew a deep breath. Her father looked around questioningly. To his simple eyes there seemed something reprehensible in such size and elegance, and his ministerial mind irresistibly questioned how many missionaries could be sent to heathen lands by the superfluous luxury. Betty did not wait for an answer. "How large is it, Father, so I can tell Edith?" "It is about 40 by 50 feet, I should say," answered her father, glad to deal with something definite. "Oh, Edith can't tell by that," protested his daughter. "Can I say it is as large as our church auditorium?" "Well, hardly, child. It is about the size of our Sunday school room, though." "Oh, what will she say?" said Betty triumphantly. "Are these Gothic ceilings?" "No, but they are remarkably fine." "Oh, look at that chair. It is like one we have with the claw and ball feet." "That was your grandmother's chair," he replied, "and she gave it to Cousin Elizabeth." "Is this a palace? Oh, what grand rugs! Why, there isn't a carpet anywhere. I am going to ask Mother to have rugs. It looks so nice and clean, and you can slide on them," she exclaimed, and she almost measured her length on the polished floor as she walked towards the door to peep into the halls beyond. "Come back, Elizabeth," her father whispered. "That is bad manners." A tall, stately, silver-haired woman, with a gracious smile of welcome, came into the room. Though entering without haste, she showed hospitable eagerness as she approached the cousin whom she had not seen for many years. She greeted him affectionately, saying in a well-modulated voice, "Dear, dear Cousin Tom! I am delighted to see you," and giving him both her hands, she turned him to the light. "The same dear Cousin Tom. And this is my namesake," she continued, taking the child's blushing face in her hands and kissing her warmly. "I am glad to have you here, dear. You must feel perfectly at home. This must be your home, as your grandmother's was mine for so many long good years." Betty felt more awed than she ever had before, and could not find a word to answer. "So must queens talk and act," she thought. Yet she was disappointed. Where were the elegant black satin dress with its flounces of lace, and the pearl necklace, and the diamond earrings? She had never in her imagination pictured her preceptress without these essentials. And no gold bracelets either. A preceptress in the robes of a queen, as shown in her books of history, was really what she expected. But since Cousin Elizabeth was a queen in ordinary clothes, she was forced to acknowledge that the soft gray gown, with its satisfying train, just suited her. An hour's conversation between the cousins followed, while Betty roamed around and inspected the pictures and furnishings of the room. A church wedding necessitated Dr. Baird's immediate return to Weston, so after seeing the building, and especially the room which Betty was to occupy, and taking notes so that he could give a detailed description to his wife, he said, "I must now bid you farewell, Cousin Elizabeth, and to your competent care entrust my daughter, who will, I believe, prove not lacking in obedience to you." With a few parting admonitions and a final kiss, he took his departure, leaving Betty alone in her room, a thoroughly homesick girl. As it was during school hours, this part of the house was as still as an empty church, and never, in all her 14 years, had Betty felt so utterly alone. The silent rooms around her, the greater ones downstairs filled with strange people, and the outlook from her windows, beautiful beyond words, yet unfamiliar and sad, accented her loneliness. The tears fell on her hands clasped on the window sill, and there seemed to be nothing to make up for the little manse next to the old red brick church, nestling among the great maples. At last she began to unpack, so she could dress for dinner. The trunk had been filled to overflowing with the things which, she believed, made up an unparalleled wardrobe. The new, really new, fine checked violet and white China silk, acknowledged by all who had seen it to be Miss Jane's masterpiece, had been very, very carefully packed in tissue paper. Its skirt was without ornamentation and remarkably voluminous, for Miss Jane was really several years ahead of the fashions in putting yards of unnecessary material in the skirt and sleeves. "Best put in a good bit of stuff, for then it will be easier to make over," she had said. The waist, too, was perfectly plain, save a sailor collar and cuffs to match, made out of some fine lace belonging to her mother. The color was so becoming that Miss Jane had forgotten her theories about children and cried out with delight, "How laylock becomes her, and how it suits her figure," turning her round and round admiringly, though there was no more to be seen of the childish figure than there is of a lily stem surrounded by its green enfolding leaves. One of her 2 school dresses was a pretty shepherd's plaid, trimmed around the bottom with 3 rows of narrow black velvet, and with a yoke trimmed in the same way. She had a coat of the same material for fall wear. The other school dress was the made-over black silk, a trifle shiny, with Miss Jane's stimulated vest of white and black silk, which was conceded by everyone to be a flattering witness to her taste and originality. This dress Betty decided to put on for her first dinner at the Pines. She looked longingly at the lilac, but that, she knew, she must not wear except on some great occasion, and this, being silk, seemed a fitting dress for her first appearance. Its skirt was at least 2 inches longer than girls of her age were then wearing, and Miss Jane had given as her reason for this extravagance that she would sprout up like a bad weed, and then it wouldn't be too long. Her 2 hats were of good sailor shape, a becoming style which she had particularly liked, because there was so little for her antics to displace. The last winter's coat, with new collars and cuffs of velvet, would, they had decided, deceive even city eyes into believing in its newness. Her muff was one her mother had for many years, and the mink was quite yellow, almost the color of Betty's hair, but she felt much secret pride in it. Miss Jane supplied her with mittens, and she had her first pair of kid gloves. Her shoes were sensible. All these, with a few of her summer clothes, Betty unpacked, remembering that only last night her mother had put them in so carefully. It seemed a year ago. She hugged her dearest books as she put them in place. her Bible that her mother had given her 4 years before, her Ossian poems, her Thomas à Kempis, and her old ballad book. Lily Bent, in 4 years at Lakeside, was like a roommate. She would understand how a girl feels on her first day away from home. Then came a worn copy of a collection of favorite poems and a quaint book which had belonged to her grandmother when a girl, in which it was written, in small, elegant writing, "Presented to Miss Elizabeth B. Seabury by her affectionate brother, Robert E. Seabury, June 12, 1820. Looking down at her from their new abode, a handsome set of dark hanging shelves which formed an excellent frame for their rich reds, blues, and golds, these books gave her a home feeling and comforted her. Her eyes turned toward them constantly as she dressed for dinner, and more than once she darted over to them and kissed them hungrily. How understanding they looked! How glad she was that she had them! Her father had often spoken about books as friends, but she never knew how dear the very covers could be, and how their gold lettering could look out with true home eyes. She fingered caressingly the ivory comb, brush, and mirror, which Cousin Elizabeth had sent to her last Christmas. They looked very nice on the mahogany dressing table, but somehow they failed to stir her enthusiasm. With them she placed Edith's parting gift, a pincushion in the shape of a heart. A narrow little plait of light brown hair, tied with white glazed ribbon, an affecting gift from Ada, was laid carefully in her Bible. A painted pin tray, Martha's votive offering and the work of her oldest sister, adorned very elegantly and daintily, Betty thought, the white covered table. She pushed all the pins well to one side, so that the wild roses could be seen. On her small writing table she put her pearl-handled pen holder and a little gold pencil, once her grandfather's, a box of fine note paper, and a curious Japanese stamp box. The room contained 2 brass beds, so she was to have a roommate. Oh, if she were only here now! Betty had never before had such a queer feeling in her heart. She didn't dare to look at her father's and mother's pictures. Would the dinner bell never ring? Hoping for escape from her homesickness, she turned to the window, and her beauty-loving eyes were held captive by the view. As far as vision could carry, there were venerable trees, while off in the distance gleamed the Hudson, like a great silver belt, winding through the green waving shadows. The dinner bell rang at length, its cheerful peal bringing back to her with renewed force the long-cherished dreams of boarding-school life, its enchanting gaiety, its delightful hubbub of girls' voices, and above all, its true loyal friendships. There, in the dining room, were her new friends. Hopefully, she ran down to them. End of chapter 4. Recording by Holly Jensen.